a.m. in New York City. Good morning. I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know. Future is taking a little dip after U.S. equities post fresh records. Investors now awaiting the latest inflation expectations print to wrap up a data-heavy week. OpenAI says it's getting closer to turning into a for-profit company after painstaking negotiations with top shareholder Microsoft. And trade talks set to continue with the U.S. and China scheduled to meet in Madrid next week. So as I was saying, futures taking just a little dip, but don't forget we're up 1.5% on both indices, the S&P and the Nasdaq 100 for the week so far. So we'll see if we continue in the red throughout the day or if that takes a little bit of a turn. You might take a look at gold for an indication of some nervousness. We're about $30 off our record. 36.41 is where we're trading at now, but the real action the last 2 weeks has been in the bond market. So let's take a look. If you look at the 2-year yield, we were trading at 3.48 Monday. We're up 7 basis points. If you look at the 30-year yield, we were trading at 4.78 at one point on Monday. We're down 13 basis points throughout the week to 4.65. Now that is a massive shift, and that's not even speaking of the moves the week before. We're going to dive into all of that today. But for the moment, let's take a look at some individual equity movers, and for that we'll go across to London and Valerie Teitel. Valerie.
Good morning, Bonnie. Let's start with Microsoft. Those shares are in the green, up 1.5%. This comes after a joint statement between Microsoft and OpenAI details a memorandum of understanding about their next phase of their partnership. It's also precluding perhaps that OpenAI would be moving more to a traditional for-profit model, and that has to do with them giving $100 billion in equity to the nonprofit. Microsoft is gaining on this news of this new stage of their partnership between OpenAI, up 1.5%. Moving on to earnings, Adobe, this is the creative software provider, surging after earnings, up 4.3%. They beat when it came to many metrics and raised their full-year guidance. And this really puts to bed some worries about competition, fierce competition from new AI incumbents. Adobe seems to be holding in there just well, up 4.3% after earnings. Lastly, Warner Brothers, this stock surged near 30% in the trade yesterday, rising again today, another 4.3%. This is on the back of reportedly Paramount preparing a bid for the entire company, backed by the Ellison family, which could potentially take the legacy media operations out in Hollywood down to 4 from 5. Bonnie?
Valerie Teitel, thank you so much. And later in the show, we'll wrap up the big week of data and look ahead to the Fed with Monica Defend of Amundi. All major U.S. equity benchmarks hit new all-time highs following that CPI print that should keep the Fed on track to cut rates next week. Joining us now is Ben Ram, cross-asset strategist for Bloomberg News. Ben, can we look at the bond market for a moment? What is this flattening telling us that we would never see if we just looked at equities?
Morning. Absolutely. I think that the flattening has caught many investors by surprise, but I think I've been saying that for a while now, that there is the risk reward is in favor of a mild flattening in the curve, because, I think that, the most significant development that's happened in the US in the past 1 month or so is that the sell America trade that we were seeing in the bond market is no longer working. At least it's hit a pause button. And I think that, investors are sensing, given the dovish Fed and given that inflation seems to be about okay, we need to be cautious on inflation here, but it seems to be at the moment under control. And I think we got those wholesale inflation print earlier this week that showed actually prices actually fell, which kind of suggests that inflation down the line may be under control. And that is giving a dash for duration. And particularly, as you were saying, we have seen that at the 10-year point of the curve and the 30-year point of the curve, it's moved a whole lot in the space of just a few days. And that's the optimism that markets have, the sweet spot, if you will, in terms of the risk premium waning and the inflation metrics being rather under control, and a Fed that is going to cut rates.
Now, we do get one more indication about inflation today at 10 p.m. with the University of Michigan sentiment data. Any possibility of a surprise in inflation expectations? Because if we did get that, that would certainly give the Fed a tiny bit of pause, for sure.
Absolutely. I think that, but regardless of what, the Michigan data shows, which is a consumer survey, I think, if you look at US inflation swaps, I mean, if you look at US one-year inflation swaps, they're thinking that inflation is going to be bobbing around current levels or a bit higher even. And I think that, that is the metric that matters more for the Fed. And I think that they are acutely cognizant that the room for them to cut rates from here is not very much. If you look at the Taylor rule rate, it is positing a rate of about 3.75 based on realized inflation. And I think that, that's about 2 rate cuts from here. So I think that, the Fed has room to chew on in 2 rate cuts. But the question really is what happens beyond then? And that's that uncertainty that will keep the market traders a bit nervous going forward.
A quick mention of gold, then we're just $30 off our high. Is that indicating nervousness that we're perhaps also not seeing in this equities rally, which, by the way, is a global equities rally, not just the United States?
Absolutely. I think that, gold is ripe for some profit taking. I think it's run up a whole lot in the space of a short period of time, whether you look at it this month or whether you look at it year to date. It's run up a whole lot. And I just ran an article earlier this week, research on the terminal that shows that gold has moved about $800 over its fair value. So I think there is some caution warranted, albeit gold has momentum working in its favor. Central banks still buying gold, working in its favor. So the short-term momentum is there, but it is vulnerable to some profit taking.
Ven, thank you so much. Always a pleasure. Ven Ram. Turning to tech now, OpenAI said it's closer to converting into a for-profit company. That headline pushing shares of Microsoft higher in pre-market trading. Let's go straight to Bloomberg Tech Europe anchor Tom McKenzie for more. So Tom, how close are we exactly to OpenAI and that restructure? Is Microsoft now fully on board?
Yeah, Vonnie, importantly, they've signed this memorandum of understanding. So let's see if they can get it across the line by the end of the year, which is important because that's when OpenAI wants to be able to unlock this $40 billion worth of investment from SoftBank, and it's one of the conditions of that investment. And also, they've just wanted to put to bed the tensions, frankly, with Microsoft over the structure of the business. So what we understand from the memorandum of understanding, that in terms of the restructure, there will still be the non-profit part of this organization that will sit atop and oversee the board and oversee governance. But then there will be the for-profit part of the business, which will be able to focus on commercialization of the product and to which will have those strong links, of course, to Microsoft. Microsoft remains the largest investor in OpenAI. Importantly as well, the non-profit part of the business will have a $100 billion stake in OpenAI. Now, if you get to a $500 billion valuation, which is what some are suggesting, then you're looking about a 20% stake. So it gives them a seat on the board and gives them that oversight, of course. So that's the broad structure that's been agreed under this memorandum of understanding. Again, important in terms of OpenAI wanting to get access to that investment from SoftBank by the end of this year, and important in terms of resetting that relationship with Microsoft. For Microsoft, still question marks in terms of the detail, in terms of whether or not they still get exclusivity, some of OpenAI's tech and AI products. I think that still needs to be worked out. But broadly, resetting that relationship is going to be important for both sides. Still some legal questions. 2 attorney generals are looking at this. And Musk, of course, has pushed through an illegal case against Sam Altman and OpenAI. So we'll see how that moves forward as well.
Well, speaking of OpenAI, Sam Altman and NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang set to announce some big investments in the UK. Can you give us some more details?
Yeah. So both CEOs of NVIDIA and OpenAI, Sam Altman, of course, Jensen Huang, as you say, will be on the ground here in the UK next week with President Trump's visit. And what the Bloomberg team have discovered through their reporting is that they will be committing, both of those companies, to what has been described as tens of billions of pounds worth of investment in data centres and infrastructure here in the UK. It's part, of course, of the Stargate project that OpenAI is now pushing beyond US borders, or sovereign AI for other nation states. I think the context is important. They've committed to 4.5 gigawatts in terms of data centers in the US with a spend of about $500 billion US dollars. They committed to about 5 gigawatts in the UAE. The numbers are going to be much smaller for the UK, but it aligns with the policy agenda of the Prime Minister, who says he wants to push forward in terms of building out AI and making it easier to build here. There's question marks about the energy costs in the UK, and question marks about whether or not the UK is really going to be able to have the data centres and the infrastructure to properly compete. But certainly the UK government will frame this as an important step forward next week.
All right, Tom, thank you so much. That is Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie, host of Bloomberg Tech Europe. Trade talks then heating back up. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will meet with China's Vice Premier in Madrid next week for another session of talks amid the trade truce between the two nations. For more, let's bring in Bloomberg's Brendan Murray, who tracks global trade for us. Brendan, so what do we know about next week's agenda in Madrid yet?
Yeah, so this came as a bit of a surprise that Secretary Bessent was going to meet with his Chinese counterpart just in the next day or two from the Treasury's announcement late yesterday. The agenda is a bit vague, so it's not clear that this is going to be the follow-on to the last round of talks that were held in Stockholm. The Treasury described the agenda as one being about national security, economic issues, including trade, and they also mentioned the TikTok deal and a more vaguely worded money laundering situation between the U.S. and China. So it doesn't appear that the U.S. trade representative is part of these talks, or at least based on the information that we have right now. So the technical details about magnets and chips, those sticking points that both sides have pointed to in the past, it doesn't appear they're going to get into those kinds of technical details, but we'll know more as the Treasury can explain to us what exactly Scott Bessent's mission is as he stops in Spain on his way to the UK, as Tom was referring to, along with a delegation with President Trump next week.
Yeah, a lot of activity in the last few days. And then on India, an envoy for Trump told a Senate committee that a US-India trade deal is near. What were the details there?
Yeah, I mean, they've been saying an India trade deal is near for about 3 or 4 months now, and so we'll have to see how this latest prediction plays out. There are major sticking points. The U.S. wants India to stop buying Russian oil. India says that's just not going to happen. That's part of our economic development over the long term, and we can't do that. So there seems to be at loggerheads there. They may be able to work out some of the other issues, investments and purchase agreements and those sorts of things. But some of the main asks on the U.S. side, India is just unwilling to budge on. And so if they say the India-U.S. trade deal is something, we're just going to have to believe it when we see it, because they've been close for a long time now.
Brendan, thank you so much. Brendan Murray, who covers trade for us there in London. Now, two other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. Armani names LVMH, Essilor and L'Oreal as potential stake buyers in the company. The late Giorgio Armani was deciding to make public his will, and that was made public on Friday, outlining conditions on selling stakes in the fashion empire. Brazil's Supreme Court has sentenced Jair Bolsonaro to 27 years and 3 months in prison for plotting a coup after his 2022 election defeat. He's the first former president convicted of such a crime in a country long scarred by power grabs. Bolsonaro's defense called the sentence excessive and plans to file appeals. Apple says its hypertension detection system for its smartwatch will arrive next week after getting FDA clearance. The tool will use data from the watch's optical heart sensor to analyze how a user's blood vessels respond to heartbeats over a 30-day time period. The user will be notified if any signs of chronic hypertension or high blood pressure are detected. Coming up, Isomorphic Labs co-founder and CEO Demis Hassabis is on a mission to harness AI to, quote, solve all disease. He speaks to Tom McKenzie exclusively. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Demis Hassabis, CEO of Alphabet's Isomorphic Labs, spoke recently to Bloomberg about the lab's lofty goals for the role of AI in medicine.
The mission statement of Isomorphic Labs is to solve all disease. Where are we, Demis, in that mission?
Well, I think we're making good progress. We're building a kind of general platform to help tackle the understanding, really, of biology and the chemistry that you need to buy into that biology. And I think if it works out, we should be able to tackle many, many diseases.
How should we think about where the time frame sits then in terms of ISO Labs discovering an AI drug and then getting it into clinical trials? Is that a 2025 proposition? Is it 2026 or further out?
Well, actually, we're at preclinical stage at the moment. We've just hired our Chief Medical Officer, Ben Wolf, and he's setting up a world-class team to help us with the clinical phase. But what we're really focusing on, what we've been focused on the last couple of years, is building the core platform and sort of extending the work we did with AlphaFold. But there's many more areas that we need to get into in terms of actually making an impact across drug discovery. And we're making great progress with that. And these first few trials are kind of examples of what the platform might be able to do.
And the internal pipeline for ISO Labs is focused on oncology and immunology, oncology, cancer. Does that suggest that you and the team think cancers can be solved first amongst some of these diseases that we face?
Well, that was always the kind of holy grail in a way, is to try and tackle cancer. But we've also done it for practical reasons as well, because the clinical aspects of that are favourable for new drugs, because obviously the disease is so serious. And so there are a number of reasons we picked those two areas. Also, partly what we think the platform's going to be able to do early on.
There's the speed and efficiency that the platform brings to it. There's the quality as well, of course. When we're thinking about preclinical research and AI drug discovery, usually using the old methods, you were talking, 3 to 6 years? To what extent can you cut that time frame down?
I think in the fullness of time, when our platforms mature in the next couple of years, I'd like to see that cut down into a matter of months instead of years. That's what I think is possible, perhaps even faster than that. So kind of order of magnitude speed up. But we'll see if that's possible. There's a lot of work we've got to do first, but our initial work, our initial signs are very promising.
You've partnered with Novartis, you've partnered with Eli Lilly. What does that tell us about what Isomorphic Labs looks like in 5-10 years' time? Do you focus on partnerships, licensing the technology, or do you want to be kind of a full stack biotech at some point?
Well, look, we have great partnerships with Lilly and Novartis, as you said, and that's helping us figure out what's needed from the platform. And they're world-class organizations, and our collaborations are being really fruitful currently. But with our internal programs, everything's on the table. We'll see those are going well too, and we'll see how far it makes sense for us to carry that through. And
do you look to deepen those relationships with Novartis and Eli Lilly beyond where they already are?
Yes. So we announced earlier this year an expansion of our Novartis partnership from 3 targets to 6 targets, and both collaborations are going very, very well.
You raised back in March. You raised your first external funding, $600 million, and you're putting that to play in different parts to build out the platform. But also, talent seems to be part of that. When you think about talent, when you think about people like Mark Zuckerberg signing checks for $200 million, what does that signal to you?
Well, Lena, that's a slightly different market, which is the pure sort of AGI market, let's say. But it's whether or not that's rational or not, I think our organizations need to think through themselves. But I do think AI is going to be one of the biggest technologies, if not the biggest, that humanity will ever invent. So in some sense, that is rational. But on the other hand, specifically with Isomorphic, we have such a compelling mission of applying AI to improve human health. I mean, what better use of AI is there than that? And that's a really compelling proposition for both our investors and our staff.
Isomorphic Labs founder and CEO and Google DeepMind CEO Sir Demis Hassabis speaking exclusively to Bloomberg's Tom McKenzie. And you can watch the full interview with Demis Hassabis on the terminal and Bloomberg.com. And on the next episode of Bloomberg Tech Europe, the team takes a deep dive into how artificial intelligence is changing the banking sector, with insights from some of the biggest names in the space. That's coming October 10th. Coming up, the battle between Lisa Cook and President Trump continues. Plus, a look at what else is making headlines in your front page news. Next, this is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Time now for your front page news. First up on the Washington Post, the search for Charlie Kirk's shooter. Law enforcement officials have released new video and photos of a person of interest in the shooting. Officials say they're still unable to find or name that person. They also said a high-powered bolt-action rifle was recovered in a wooded area. Next up, the Wall Street Journal reporting that Paramount Skydance is preparing a majority cash bid for Warner Brothers Discovery. Sources say the bid will be for the entire company, including its cable networks and movie studio. And on the FT, the Trump administration has asked a U.S. appeals court to allow the president to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook. The government called on the court to rule by the close of business September 15th, a day before the Fed starts its two-day meeting. Let's get a check on markets now. We are seeing futures pointing just a slight bit lower, but bear in mind it's been an up week so far for the major indices to the tune of 1.5% plus for the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq 100. That might change today, although we're not looking too convinced in the direction down. Let's take a look at the two-year yield, though, because that has moved up 7 basis points if you take it from its low Monday at 3.48 to its high today, 3.55.56. Not the same for the long end. The long end has been coming down. We have the 30-year yield now down about 13 basis points at 4.66. A very fascinating move there that does still continue. Coming up, we'll catch up with Monica Defend of Amundi Investment Institute. This is Bloomberg. It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City. Good morning. I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's what you need to know. Futures dipping after U.S. equities post fresh records. Investors await the latest inflation expectations print to wrap up a data-heavy week. OpenAI says it's getting closer to turning into a for-profit company after painstaking negotiations with top shareholder Microsoft. And trade talks set to continue with the U.S. and China scheduled to meet in Madrid next week. Let's take a look at those markets then, because sure, futures are lower, but just very fractionally, and we have had a very up week. U.S. indices up 1.5% plus a piece, in fact, this week. Gold showing just a little bit of trepidation, up about 0.3%, but we're about $30 off the high that we made this week. The real story is in yields, where that flattening continues. We see the two-year up another basis point plus to 355.36 right now. The 30-year yield unchanged, but it's come down quite substantially just this week alone, never mind last week, to 466.12. Remember when we were just hitting 5% last week? We're a far cry from there. Let's get to some individual stocks to watch now for this Friday session. Here's Valerie Teitel. Valerie.
Good morning, Avani. Let's start with Microsoft. As you mentioned, they reached a memorandum of understanding with OpenAI. They both released a joint statement yesterday detailing the next stage of their partnership. And Microsoft is up nearly 1.5% on the back of this news, as perhaps OpenAI is getting more and more close to turning into a traditional for-profit company. Now, this part of the realignment in OpenAI could deal with giving the nonprofit $100 billion of equity. So keep an eye on this story. But Microsoft shareholders sure are liking it. Moving on to earnings, Adobe out with a beat yesterday after the bell. Now, this is putting to bed some fears that it's being beaten to the punch on competition from other AI entrants into the market. Up 4.2% for Adobe. They make creative software. They beat on many metrics, Vonnie, and also raised their full-year guidance, so giving investors some assurance there. Lastly, let's go on to Warner Brothers, rising yet again. It rose nearly 30% in the session yesterday, rising another almost 4% in pre-market. This is on the back of Paramount being said to prepare a bid for the entire company, and this will be backed by the Ellison family. The father of Larry Ellison, David Ellison, runs Paramount as an independent filmmaker, and it's being said that perhaps maybe the boost of Oracle's stock price is making the Larry Ellison family wanting to put some of that cash to work. Bonnie?
Absolutely. Valerie, thank you so much. Valerie Teitel there. Just one more key data print to wrap up the busy week. The University of Michigan Sentiment Survey at 10 a.m. Eastern. And then, of course, we count down to the Fed decision next week. We made it through most of the data. Monica Defend of Amundi writes this, quote, "The Fed's focus is shifting from inflation to growth, while political pressure on the Fed is rising." Monica joins me now. She's head of the Amundi Investment Institute. So, Monica, if that's the case, if the balance of risks are shifting and the Fed is looking more at growth now, how many cuts do we get this year?
We do expect 3 cuts, and this is really on the line of the labor market data that we've been seeing so far that are showing the labor market not falling from a cliff, but definitely moderating. And this was really aligned with what we had in mind over the last few months. So we confirm the idea of 3 cuts this year and more to come next year.
Is the Fed in time? Michael Hartnett of Bank of America writing that financial markets are betting that the Fed is in fact still ahead of the curve and will be when it starts lowering borrowing costs next week, assuming that happens. We have seen slower labour market prints in the last few weeks.
Yes, indeed. But there is really something that is changing, we do believe, underneath the U.S. economy. It is not really easy and visible yet, but all the tech evolution, if not revolution, that is taking place is having an impact. And we see this priced by the market if you look at the tech sector and the few names on the index that eventually are leading to this concentration on the U.S. market. But we do not have to worry. The U.S. economy is proving resilient, and this cool down of the labor market is compensated by solid corporate earnings that so far have been surprising on the upside.
Yeah, speaking of earnings, we just started to get a look at some corporate profit margins getting strained in this week's PPI data. Do you anticipate we'll see a lot more of that in the next earnings season?
Well, this is something that has not been visible yet, but this is what we think might be a risk in the remainder of the year. And as a result, this is why we still positive on risky assets, but I would say we have not a sanguine outlook on risky assets.
Yeah, it's incredible that we're seeing this rally continue in spite of some of these little red flags. I'm curious, U.S. large cap equities, in Amundi's position, how lofty are these multiples?
Well, if you look at the S&P 500 at 22 plus price earning is definitely high if we compare to the current inflation framework we have. Probably the equally weighted index is running on more conceivable valuation metrics, and this is where we are looking at. But all in all, given the macro uncertainty on various fronts, trade, tariffs, policy pressure on institutions, it's really difficult to have strong, bold, top-down positioning and recommendations on regions. Maybe it's safer to stay on sectors positioning.
Sure, but then you read something like this from Bloomberg Intelligence, which points out that historically, across cutting cycles from the Fed, the S&P has averaged an annualized 14.8% gain, and that's even in recessions where the gain was, a little bit less, but still 11%. I mean, do we see that this time round as well?
Well, we do think that the S&P 500 can still deliver positive returns from now to year-end. But if you balance the risk and the returns, as I was saying, probably why not staying on sectors such as financials, utilities, communication services. These allow you to implement some long-term investment themes, thinking about climate change, thinking about the tech revolution. So this would allow you to navigate the landscape in the coming months that might be particularly noisy.
So you say healthcare, communications, financials as well. You have an outlook that's positive on financials in spite of a rate-cutting cycle getting underway?
Yeah, well, we have this idea of steepening that probably is one of the strongest conviction we have. The steepening has been a crowded trade, and we have seen this quite visible here to date. But statistically, there is a long-run tour that movement that still can materialize, having in mind that on one side, the short end will be pricing an accommodative monetary stance with the Fed still cutting rates 3 times this year, while the long end of the curve is pricing some higher inflation and debt that will remain high in the coming months.
Monica, thank you so much for joining us today. An absolute pleasure. Monica Defend there of Amundi. Now to other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. Apple says its hypertension detection system for its smartwatch will arrive next week after getting FDA clearance. The tool will use data from the watch's optical heart sensor to analyze how a user's blood vessels respond to heartbeats over a 30-day time period. The user will be notified if any signs of chronic hypertension or high blood pressure are detected. Brazil's Supreme Court has sentenced Jair Bolsonaro to 27 years and 3 months in prison for plotting a coup after his 2022 election defeat. He is the first former president convicted of such a crime in a country long scarred by power grabs. Bolsonaro's defense called the sentence excessive and plans to appeal. The UK economy stagnated in July, marking a tepid start to the third quarter. This comes as consumers and businesses come under pressure from tax increases, with the possibility of more to come when Chancellor Rachel Reeves delivers the annual budget November 26th. Coming up, Microsoft rising in pre-market trading as the top shareholder of OpenAI reaches early agreement in turning the firm for profit. More next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. OpenAI inching closer to converting into a for-profit company. That pushing shares of Microsoft higher in pre-market trading. Let's get straight to Bloomberg Tech Europe anchor Tom McKenzie. So how close are we now to that OpenAI restructure? Tom, is Microsoft fully on board?
Well, this is a significant move forward, certainly, Vonnie, in terms of putting to bed the tensions with Microsoft, which, of course, is still their biggest backer and biggest investor, and moving closer to opening up that $40 billion worth of SoftBank investment that they hope to get at the end of this year. And that's partly contingent on having a for-profit part of the business. There will still be, overseeing OpenAI, a non-profit unit, which will look at governance and will look at things like safety. And that non-profit part of the business will also get a $100 billion stake in the for-profit, for public benefit corporation part of the business as well. It's complicated, but what it does do is ease the tensions between Microsoft and OpenAI and leads to a structure that may be more amenable to tapping some of that future investment from the likes of SoftBank, and means that the for-profit part of OpenAI can focus more now on commercialization of its product and continuing to deliver. It doesn't mean that all the legal challenges are completely put to one side. There are two attorney generals still looking at this, and Elon Musk is still pursuing a legal case against OpenAI, one of the original co-founders, of course, but it certainly resets that relationship with Microsoft. And if they can get it over the line in terms of a concrete agreement between the two sides, then they'll get that $40 billion from SoftBank.
For sure. And then in exchange for this massive financial backing, Microsoft has the right to incorporate OpenAI into all of its tools, right?
Yeah, that's a really important point, Vonnie, that you zero in on, because what they've been concerned about at Microsoft is that OpenAI are starting to partner with lots of other hyperscalers. They have a deep partnership now with the likes of Oracle. They have a deep partnership with the chip producer, which is NVIDIA, of course. So there's some concern that some of the tech that OpenAI is building out will not be exclusively for Microsoft. Microsoft want to nail down what they're going to be getting, what parts of the technology they will be exclusively being able to embed into their own software and the products that they ship to their enterprise and individual customers as well. So it goes some way to offering some relief to Microsoft investors, and you can see that reflected in the pre-market upside that's coming through for that stock right now.
Tom, earlier you spoke with DeepMind's CEO. It was a fascinating conversation with Demis Hassabis. He has a massive vision, I think is the only way to put it, for how AI might impact the world. Can you explain more?
Well, that was always the kind of holy grail in a way, is to try and tackle cancer. But we've also done it for practical reasons as well, because the clinical aspects of that are favourable for new drugs, because obviously the disease is so serious. And so there are a number of reasons we picked those two areas. Also, partly what we think the platform's going to be able to do early on.
There we go, a little illustration. So, Tom, what else did he say?
Yeah, look, you pointed to the massive ambitions of Demis Hassabis, and he has a massive role as well, because he oversees essentially all of the core AI product for Alphabet, as well as being the CEO of Isomorphic Labs, which has that mission statement of literally solving all disease. What really stood out to me was he put a time frame around drug discovery and how they think they can shorten that, potentially to months, even shorter, potentially weeks as well, within a 2-year timescale, 2 to 3 years. A couple of years is how he framed it. He thinks there's going to be significant progress on that part of getting drugs to market, the drug discovery piece. I also talked to him about the talent wars, of course, and asked him what he thought about, for example, Mark Zuckerberg paying some of the talent that he's been poaching, $200 million. Demis Hassabis said, given the impact that he thinks AI is going to have on the world and how revolutionizing it's going to be, he thinks that's pretty rational. So he gave us some clarity in terms of the build out that they are doing at Isomorphic Labs to get to that point where possibly we can get to faster drug delivery, faster drug discovery, and what that means for tackling diseases like cancer, which he says is the holy grail for him and the team.
Yeah, incredible ambition and more power to him. Tom, thank you. You can find more of this interview with Demis Hassabis on your terminal and Bloomberg.com. Turning to Washington, D.C. now, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is planning to meet China's vice premier in Madrid next week. More trade talks on the table, it seems. Meanwhile, a Trump envoy says that the U.S. is close to resolving its trade tensions with India. For more, Bloomberg's Kasia Klimaszinska joins us now. So, Kasia, what is the latest on this trade front with China in particular? We've had a lot of movement, a lot of chatter and talks in the last few days, not necessarily among the trade partners, but among plenty of officials.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Here we'll have new developments next week when Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent will travel to Europe. He will go to Madrid and then to London. And he is expected to meet with his China counterpart, China Vice Premier, in Madrid. The two will talk probably most likely about tariffs, about trade, potentially also about TikTok's U.S. operations and national security. It's not the first time that Scott Bessent is meeting his Chinese counterparts, but this time the stakes are much higher as President Trump and President Xi will likely meet later this year in October, perhaps during a key economic summit in South Korea, or maybe just one-on-one for a special Trump-Xi summit. So probably Scott Bessent is heading to Madrid next week to meet Chinese officials and try to set those talks.
And then closer to home, President Trump has asked a court to pause an order blocking his attempt to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook. Of course, the FOMC next week. So what is the latest?
Exactly. So this key FOMC meeting next week is at stake. And the Fed is meeting on Tuesday and Wednesday to talk about interest rates. And President Trump doesn't want Fed Governor Lisa Cook to join that meeting. So he asked a court to basically let him fire her. Remember, the reason here is that the Trump administration believes that Lisa Cook committed mortgage fraud, that she claimed 2 different houses as her primary residence, whereas Cook says that this was only a clerical error. It happened before she joined the Fed, and that she needs to join those key deliberations that is important for the U.S. and global financial markets.
You know, Axios reporting that President Trump is meeting with the Qatari Prime Minister today. What do we know about this particular meeting and developments in the Middle East?
This is very interesting. It's not on the official schedule from the White House for today. According to the White House, President Trump has a TV interview in the morning and then he is in New York. So Axios is reporting that in New York, Trump might meet his Qatar counterpart later today. Obviously, this meeting would make a lot of sense after Israel attacked Hamas in Doha. President Trump could reiterate his support for Qatar and his criticism of that attack. And for Qatar, that would be an opportunity to extend their global push to force Israel to end the war in Gaza.
For sure, yeah. Looking ahead to next week, Politico reporting that the UK and the United States have actually restarted steel talks. Obviously, Trump's state visit is next week, so it would be timely.
Big week for President Trump. Yes, he's heading to the UK for historic second state visit next week. He's bringing tech CEOs with him. You had Tom talking about AI and big tech earlier. There is some expectations for some big tech deals to be announced, but also, of course, trade talks between the US and the UK. The UK wants to sell more into the US with lower tariffs, especially steel and aluminium is at stake. The UK wants lower tariffs for those metals flowing into the US.
Kasia, thank you so much. Kasia Klimaszinska there in Washington. To a Bloomberg scoop now, Bloomberg has learned that the late Giorgio Armani named LVMH, Essilor and L'Oreal as preferred buyers for a stake in his fashion empire. The details of his will were made public today. EssilorLuxottica told Bloomberg it will carefully evaluate a potential stake. Joining us for more is Andrea Felsted from Bloomberg Opinion. What a fascinating will to have read out. What might it mean for the luxury industry, Andrea?
It's setting up the next big takeover battle in luxury. You know, these prized assets come up for sale very, very rarely. Once they're snapped up, they never come onto the market again. There's going to be a lot of interest in this business.
Yeah, and I understand it's a 15% stake. Now, of the companies mentioned, who might be interested, who might have the cash, who might jibe well with the Armani brand?
I mean, obviously, L'Oreal and EssilorLuxottica are licensees for the beauty and the eyewear, so they might be interested in a stake. I'm not sure if buying the whole thing eventually, which is likely to happen, is a stretch. For me, the obvious buyer is LVMH. It's big, it's got the financial firepower, it's got the expertise. Armani is primarily focused on clothing. There's potential in leather goods, which LVMH excels in. You could do more with that beauty license. It's also, Giorgio Armani is one of the first designers to realise that the future of luxury is actually in experiences. It's got hotels and restaurants, and this is an area that LVMH has also focused on. Its ambitions have taken a step back with the luxury downturn, but I could see LVMH going much more into experiences in the future, and Armani would pave the way for that. So really, for me, LVMH is the obvious buyer if they're interested.
Oh, Andrea, it's going to be fascinating. And Armani also saying that the initial stake could eventually increase up to 54.9% after 3 years. He had it all thought out. Bloomberg Opinion columnist Andrea Felsted there. Coming up, the latest piece of data to wrap up the week in your day ahead. That's next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Now a look at what's ahead today. Of course, University of Michigan sentiment data comes out at 10 a.m. Eastern. Then don't miss our conversation with Tesla board chair Robin Denholm. That's at 11 a.m. on Bloomberg Tech. And President Trump is meeting with the Qatari Prime Minister later today. That's according to a report from Axios. Let's take a look at some stocks that are likely to move today. Microsoft higher on an agreement with OpenAI about the structure of their partnership, a move that could pave the way for the AI startup to convert into a for-profit firm. Adobe extending post-earnings gain had a strong outlook, which suggests payoff from AI features. Restoration Hardware there are falling hard as quarterly results show tariff impacts mounting. It cut its sales outlook. Let's take a look at the macro environment as we head into the final trading day of the week. So we have futures pointed very, very, very fractionally lower after indices rose 1.5% plus this week. Brent crude a little bit higher. Don't forget we had that warning of a record surplus for next year from the IEA. Macquarie also out with a note today talking about the surplus, but we're coming off our lows. The bond market is very interesting. We have the 2-year yield at 3.55 today, up 7 basis points this week. The 30-year yield down another 15 basis points practically this week. A very fascinating move. Surveillance continues the conversation now. This is Bloomberg.